Tatiana, I hope you will understand everything I said.
I understood that I'm a writer. That's
Yes, indeed, and you're very famous and very famous. Unknown to not necessary to mention that, but okay. Enjoy your evening and
Thank you. I think we're waiting for your colleague to get the microphone.
Yes,
on.
indeed,
Yes.
and he is
Exactly.
fixing it now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Dank je.
Ja. Veel plezier allemaal.
Please test the microphone. Just talk it.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. And keep while keep the microphone a bit close when you talk.
Okay.
Okay.
That would be the won't see.
Okay. That would be better. Okay?
Okay, so I turn this off.
Yes.
Because if your phone rings while you're doing an interview, it's not very.
It's not very professional.
No, it's not very professional.
No, I understand.
Yeah, it has happened before, though.
Of course, and it will happen in the audience, probably,
Probably.
too.
Exactly.
So how are you, Tatiana? Back on the road
I'm
again?
okay, back on the road, yes, absolutely. After 2 years of not being able to travel, it's been both a pleasure to see my readers again,
Mm-hmm.
not only here, but in France, because everything for the past 2 years had to close down, as you know.
Yes.
So it is very nice to be back and to travel, to meet my readers. But I had forgotten how tiring it is. And I'm 2 years older now.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so I forgot about that.
But I always have the impression that you like to meet your readers
I do.
and to discuss your work with them.
I do. I think that it's important to have a feedback, and especially after the COVID years where we couldn't do this.
Mhm.
You know, we did everything with the screen, with the phones, with the computers. It was very sad, very depressing. So I think it's really important to be traveling and going to the bookstores and meeting everybody. Although I must admit that I didn't realize this book has come out in France probably 6 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
And I have a very heavy book tour.
Mhm.
I said yes to everything.
Yes,
But
because you missed it.
I forgot what
Yes.
exactly it meant.
Yes, that France is a big country.
And so I'm tired but very happy.
Mhm.
And that's the most important thing.
Yes, that's the most important
Exactly.
thing. And could we call this a lockdown book?
Well, yes and no. I wrote it during lockdown, but I don't want my readers to think that it's a depressing book, because
No,
it's
not
not.
at
I mean,
all.
for once I've written something, you know, that goes towards the light. Usually I don't. Usually my books are rather dark, and this one isn't. So
How do you explain that?
I'm gonna try and see if I can hold the microphone in my hand, because I don't know if I can. Is this okay? Yes. I don't have to bend down. Well, the thing is, when I started writing this book, I want you to go back to March 2020. I know it was different here in Holland. You guys didn't take COVID seriously. In France we did, and we really had a very severe lockdown.
Yes.
We were really confined to our apartments. We could only go out for 1 hour a day and 1 kilometer. So that was really, really something that I had never gone through. And at that point, I had just published a book called Flowers of Darkness.
Mhm.
I was supposed to be coming here to do a promotion, of course,
Mhm.
no promotion. And I realized quite quickly that there would be no promoting, no traveling. So what does a confined writer do? Well, she gets back to work.
Yeah.
But at that point, I hadn't had a proper idea yet.
No, of course. Yeah.
Because usually I promote my books for about, say, 6 months,
Mhm.
and then I get back to work. So in March, I was supposed to be promoting until the end of the year. And then when I find myself stuck behind my desk, like most of us here, I realized I didn't quite know what I was going to write about. But I know I had to write because there was nothing else for me to do. Writing is my life, writing is my job. So
Did you need it also to remain sane?
I don't think writers are always completely sane,
Okay.
frankly.
Okay. But a
I
little
think
bit sane.
if we were sane, we wouldn't write.
But now you had to write.
Exactly, I had to write.
It wasn't a choice.
It wasn't a choice, I had to write, so I remember sitting down and saying, what am I going to write about? We are surrounded with such a worrying, depressing virus, we know nothing about it yet, and so I said to myself, okay, I'm going to write a thriller. So I thought that I was going to write a thriller, but it's not a thriller, right?
Well, it has suspense elements.
It has suspense elements, but I thought that I was going to write something that had nothing to do with me at all.
Okay,
You see what I mean?
I see what
So
you mean.
it was a bit like a sort of exercice de style. That I'd go into something that maybe wouldn't take much time, that wouldn't take much effort, that it would be like a sort of, a place where I could go to every day, just to take my mind off COVID and being worried about COVID, etc. And then I realized quite quickly that this was not a thriller at all, that it was something very different.
But tell me, how did you realize that? How does that work?
Okay, so first of all, when I was sitting there, desperate behind my desk, thinking I have to write something, or I am really going to go even more insane than I am.
Now we're talking.
I had the idea of these two women, very clearly, beginning with an accident. One older woman, a bit worrying, a bit mysterious, and one younger woman, more fragile, and a bit sort of you can immediately sense that there's something, that she has a secret. And then when I started to get the feel of it, like, you know, when you get into a boat and you pull up your sail, and then you don't really know where you're going, but all of a sudden the wind comes into your sail and you think,
yeah,
I've caught a nice little wind here.
yes.
So you click in your sail and you think, okay, I'll go vaguely over there.
That's the direction.
Exactly, so I knew vaguely where I was going. And then, first thing happened, as I was writing the book, so it begins with an accident. There's this younger woman who is making her way back home from work. She's a sound engineer, and it's a rainy day in Paris. Strikes on in Paris, not much fun. So there's no public transport, so she has to walk her way home. It's a long walk. And when she gets to Place d'Italie, she sees she witnesses a very violent accident. The woman right in front of her is run over by a car. And Candice is somebody who's very generous, thinks of others, helpful. So she stops and
That's the only one.
She's the only one. Most people are filming with their phones.
Yes.
Or staring and thinking, oh, and going home. So Candice stops. And at that point, I said to myself, right, okay, I'm going to go into this relationship between these two women, what happens? And that's when the first strange thing began to happen. I began to get caught up with rather personal elements. In most of my books, I've never talked about anything personal. Her name was Sarah is not at all my story, although a lot of people thought that I had that horrible husband and that I'm Julia Jarmond. Absolutely no way. I'm not American. I don't have her personality at all.
And people think that because she's a writer or a journalist.
People think that because
it's easy.
I was using the first person, and I think readers sometimes like to identify themselves with characters, that means that we've succeeded in creating a character that's very believable.
Of course.
But I have never in my books, except perhaps in, I'm trying to remember the Dutch name because my wonderful Dutch publisher always changes the titles of my books.
She ran away.
Yeah, she ran away. I think she can hear my voice and she knows what I'm saying.
Yes.
So I think this was called, it's the Rain Watcher in English, and in Dutch, I think it's the Family Reunion. And that had personal elements in it. But in this new book, some very personal things were filtering in. And at first, I said to myself, wait a minute, it's still time to stop.
Yes.
You can continue with the thriller, you know, rather, as we say in French, manichéen, meaning sort of very all black, all white situation, no gray zones, no shadow zones. But then the other part of me was saying, no, wait a minute, why don't you explore writing about something you've never told anyone about, you've never talked about? Why don't you're all by yourself in the lockdown, there's only your husband at the end of the apartment, he's certainly not gonna ask what you're writing, he respects your work too much, you're by yourself, you're with your computer.
You don't have to publish in the
You
end.
don't have to publish it. Nobody's asking what you're doing, as we were all, you know, in our own homes.
Busy with other
Not like we were
other
having
things,
parties
yes.
every evening.
No.
So I thought, okay, I'll continue, and I'll see where it goes. So that was the first personal element,
Yes.
which I'm sure you can guess what it is, and we can talk about it if you want to, because I've gotten used to talking about it, which was difficult in the beginning, but
I
now
would like
can.
to talk about it, but
Okay.
perhaps later on.
Later on.
Because it started out as these two women, and then it went in another direction.
Yes, but then there's something else that happened.
Okay.
First of all, there's the personal part that we'll talk
Yes.
about later, and then something very surprising happened. So I was really getting into my story with these two women, one woman helping the other, and the woman who has the accident, Dominique, she asks this young woman, Candice, to go to her apartment and get some clothes because she's very gravely wounded and she needs to get some stuff from her house. So Candice, being this very nice person, and we sense that Dominique is somebody who's rather lonely in her life. She's in her 50s or 60s, she's a mysterious woman. So she finds herself in a little apartment, and I hadn't at all planned anything about that apartment, but as you know,
It's typically of you.
of course,
There are always apartments
Well,
and
this is it.
houses and everything.
of course, so
How could you be surprised?
No, you're right. So I said to myself, wait a minute. So at first I was excited because when Candice gets to Dominique's apartment, she's very curious about who Dominique is. And so she starts feeling guilty, of course, but she starts to sort of wonder what's under the bed.
Snooping around.
Yes, opening letters, doing things that she should absolutely not be doing. And I was having a lot of fun doing that. And there's, as you know, something very sexy under the bed.
I know.
You know. You don't know yet, but you'll see. So I was really getting into this and feeling that, you know, I was quite taken with my story. And all of a sudden, as I'm sitting there writing my book in this secret place where I go every day, where nobody disturbs me, nobody can disturb me in this place, you know, all of a sudden I hear somebody knocking on my inner door, and I'm like, who dares to knock while I'm working? The knock goes on. I get up in my inner space, of course. I go to the door, I open it, and there I see, standing there, this man, I'd say middle-aged, with a beard, strange little glasses, a bit plump. I immediately recognize him as one of my favorite writers, Émile Zola. And I say to him, Émile, I don't know what you're doing here. I'm writing a book about a thriller about two women. There is absolutely no place for you in this book. He stares at me. This is the man who wrote J'accuse, okay? So you don't...
Fuck around.
Exactly, exactly. I wouldn't dare say that, but you don't. And he just looks at me and he gives me a letter, which you can see on the cover of the book, because that's his handwriting. We imitated it perfectly. He gives me a letter. I open it. I recognize that this is one of the love letters he wrote to a very important person in his life. And all of a sudden, Émile Zola has opened up a whole new exciting part of the book, because this famous apartment that Dominique lives in is an apartment that had a very special story for him. And that's where the memory of walls come back.
Here they are.
I
again.
can't escape it. I can't escape it.
No. Even during lockdown.
Exactly, even during lockdown. And that's how Émile Zola found his way into the story. But I want to explain, though, that it's not a biography. This is
No.
nothing to do with Mandely
No.
Forever.
No.
And if you haven't read Émile Zola, if you don't even know who he is, it doesn't really matter, because it's not the huge classical writer that I want to talk about here. It's the intimacy of a man's secret life.
Mhm.
And that's how he comes into the book. And I wasn't expecting that at all.
But you had written about him before.
Yes,
So
in this
he-
book,
Yes.
I'm very bad at the pronouncing the title, the one called Célestine Dubac, The
Mhm.
Life That Is Yours.
Mhm.
I wrote that book 30 years ago, and Émile Zola is already in this book.
Yes. And it was published
It was
last
published
year.
last year because it was turned down by my first publisher, and then when I was cleaning out my cellar, I came across this forgotten manuscript, and I gave it to my publishers, and they really liked it. And when I read it again, I realized that Émile Zola already had a part in that book, and that's when I started reading his work again. I had already read him when I was 13.
You traveled, you followed his footsteps for yet another book. So he is big in your imagination.
he
Can you
is.
explain that?
When I was about 12 or 13, there were two very important authors for me. I think you know that I'm half French, half British. The British side was very impressed by Daphne du Maurier, Rebecca, The Birds, Jamaica Inn, which I read and absolutely loved, and that also inspired my work. I think Daphne du Maurier is also the one who gave me the taste for open endings, which I think my readers sometimes get very angry with, but that's all her fault. The end of Rebecca is the most open ending you've ever seen. Not the movie, because Hitchcock closed it, but that was his choice. And she also gave me the fascination for family secrets. And then, at about the same time, our French teacher made us read L'Assommoir. I don't know how L'Assommoir is translated in
Dutch.
I think they've kept
The
this.
Popstoot.
Okay, good. Thank you. And that was really a shock, because Émile Zola's work is so powerful, so potent. When you read his work, you are immediately transported into another world. It's almost like you can see things differently, you smell things differently, you taste things differently. His writing is perhaps the most precise. His descriptions are the most interesting, fascinating, sometimes difficult, because he goes into details, but he doesn't shy away from describing sometimes very difficult subjects. In Thérèse Raquin, for example, which is his first novel, there's a scene at the morgue, which I think nobody can read without having a nightmare afterwards. So I was completely sort of like bowled over, dazzled by Émile Zola. And that's when I started reading him regularly, but I didn't know much about his life then. I didn't know how he died. I didn't know that he spent most of his life torn between two women. I didn't know that he was this brave writer who wrote J'accuse, defending the honor of a Jewish captain who was accused of espionage, and that would change his life. I was just a reader. I was not yet completely drawn into his life. That came later. But once I'd started reading about him, I couldn't stop. So I didn't research this book, but it was I'd say that I had already read so much about him and I was so interested in him.
In your subconscious.
Exactly.
It was
He was
crawling.
already there.
Yes.
Exactly. He
He
was
had
waiting for his moment.
Yes, and this that came now,
Right.
this novel. And
Exactly.
He gave the title.
The title is important because, so I don't want to spoil the book for you in the sense that you
No.
will discover how he died, and it's very tragic. Many people think that Zola died in his sleep as an old man. He wasn't old, he was only 62 years old, and he died in a very tragic and shocking way, which was hushed for many reasons, as you will discover. And these are his last words.
Mhm.
He pronounced those words. He thought that he had eaten something that disagreed with him, that he was having some sort of indigestion or something. And well, no, that's not the story. And interestingly enough, I had found another title for the book. I'll tell you what it is, which my French publishers were not happy with. In the beginning, I quote him from one of his most famous novels called Germinal, which I'm sure you've heard of. And in French, it's Souffle la chandelle, je n'ai pas envie de voir la couleur de mes idées. You can read it because my Dutch is not good enough.
Blaas de kaars uit. Ik hoef de kleur van mijn gedachten niet te zien.
So I had come up with the title La couleur des idées. How would you say that in Dutch?
The color of my...
But in Dutch.
In Dutch. De kleur van mijn gedachten.
Okay, I had come up with that. I was very happy with that.
Mhm.
And my French publisher said, no, c'est pas bien du tout. They had published, there was quite a famous book that came out called La couleur des sentiments.
Mhm.
So they thought it was too close to that. So I was kind of unhappy, and I didn't really know what the title was until we came to the end of the book, and then one of the members of my editorial team said, what about Morgen zal het beter gaan?
He said, yeah,
That's good.
let's
yeah.
do a Dutch title.
Yeah, right. So it's actually a title. When I first started signing the book in the book fairs in France, before the press came out, before people even knew what the book was about, I had all these people coming up and saying to me, look, I don't know what your book is about and I don't care, but I'm going to buy it because I love the title.
Yeah,
And after everything we've gone through with
Yeah.
the COVID,
it was very appropriate.
I think it was,
Yeah.
you know, so that's the story behind the title.
So we have two surprises in this novel for the writer. Is that unusual for you to be so surprised while writing?
Yes, because usually I plan out my books. I like to know where I'm going. I used to find this some sort of element of security. Now I realize that writing this book that way, a bit like I wrote This Life That Is Yours all those years ago, I didn't really know where I was going, and I think that is what finally is so thrilling about writing.
Liberating, yeah.
And you're not like stuck, you know, with a plan and a chapter. Yeah.
Coloring it in, filling it out.
Because usually I would embark upon the journey of writing, knowing more or less where I was going, feeling a bit like I'm on a highway, feeling secure, knowing that at one point there'll be a toll, at one point I can stop at a restaurant. Somebody said, I don't know who this is, but somebody once said, I read this, writing is like driving along a strange country road that's very bumpy with very weak headlamps. You don't know where you're going, and I think that that's the most important thing, because if you know exactly where you're going, your book could be perhaps not surprising. This book, when I would sit down at my desk in the morning, I did not know what Dominique and Candice were going to do. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 scenes. I would catch myself saying, do you really want to go there? Is this? And then the other voice would say, yes, absolutely. So it was like total freedom. going back to a certain form of creativity which I hadn't experienced for a very long time, but also bearing in mind that when your boat is sailing along this sea and you don't quite know where you're going, that doesn't mean that you're not working. That doesn't mean that you're just filling in the pages, and it means that you have to then go back to your story and make sure that all your little knots and all your little, everything that you're twisting, pulling into place, that it stands up properly. And I had to go back afterwards several times for details that I hadn't thought of. And the ending, I had no idea how to end this book. I had a very dark ending in the beginning, and there's one sentence that I want you to read, which is not going to give anything away, don't worry.
No.
But in this part, where there's a rather powerful scene, okay, so in the French version it was in italics, so it's more easy, and it was the word ne te laisse pas faire. I think that, I know where it is, I think I know where it is. So there's one scene which is pivotal in the book, and I said to myself, okay, either I can end the book there and in a rather dark manner, but it didn't seem to be the right thing to do because it wasn't going to give any answers, and this book has to give answers at one point because it's also the story of somebody who's going to get better, somebody who's on the road to becoming who she really is, and I had to show that progress. And if I had ended it in that very dark way, no, hold on. Your language is very, sometimes difficult to understand.
Well, we think that about French.
Yes, I know you do. I know you do. Oh, here it is, hold on. I can't find it. Anyway, at the end of that very violent scene, where you think that it could even have ended worse.
Yes.
I'm sure you know what it is.
Yes.
What's that sentence that comes back? Ne te laisse pas faire means don't let yourself be taken over. And she repeats.
Okay, in her head, yeah.
Okay, what is that sentence? Because it's so important.
Yes. Well, now I'm. Yeah, something like that.
And it comes back like a mantra. Okay. And at that point I had thought that I would have this dark ending. And then I just realized that we were still going through this pandemic. We were still in a dark place in our lives. And this book had to go towards some form of light. I could not end this book the way I ended, for example, Flowers of Darkness, or the way I ended the family reunion, or The House I Loved. I had to go towards the light. But this is not a feel-good book, and I'm not a feel-good author. Well, I don't think I ever will be, but so all of a sudden I realized how I could do this. And that's what I mean when I say I didn't plan it, but then when I understood that I got the idea for it, I had to construct it. And I had to go back and make sure that
all the signs were in the right direction.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that was interesting.
So it was a very interesting book to write for you.
It was completely a new experience.
Yes, and writing like this, now we're coming back to the personal element, made that possible.
Yes, exactly. And I think that this book, if I had planned it, it would have been a very...
You have planned it like this?
No, of course it would have been a completely different book. It would have been the more classical thriller.
Yeah.
But there would have been no personal elements, and I don't think Emile Zola would have been in it at all.
So the personal elements were so strong you couldn't ignore them. You had to write about that subject. Do you want to talk about that?
I can. I've become used to talking about it now. It was difficult in the beginning because I had never mentioned this even to my family, so this book was a shock to them.
Yes, it was a
Because-
coming out.
It was a coming out in a way.
Yes.
Candice, who's 28, you understand quite quickly in the beginning of the book that she suffers from what we call eating disorders. I don't know what the name here is in.
Eetstoornissen.
So it's personal because it happened to me when I was. It started when I was much younger, when I was 15, and it lasted for a very, very long time, and my family did not know. So what are eating disorders for those who don't know? It can either be bulimia or anorexia, or it can also be a mixture of both, or binge eating. People who have a problem with the way they see their own bodies. People who suffer from this have a distorted body image. They don't see themselves the way they really are. They always see themselves as always too fat, or not attractive enough, or not... Well, in fact, people who suffer from this have zero self-confidence. So this is the story of Candice. And I had absolutely no intention, as I told you, of talking about this because it was a very painful subject for me. It took me years to get over it. I didn't even know when I started suffering from this that it was an illness.
You thought you were the only one.
Yes, of course, I thought that I had a problem with my weight, that I was always dieting. I come from a family where the way you look is very important. Being thin is very important, being healthy and sportive. And social media didn't exist back then, but there still was a lot of pressure on women, young girls, to be thin. So I was always on a diet, and I was encouraged by people around me who said, oh, that's good. And I was never fat. The irony of the situation is that I was never fat, but I saw myself as somebody who was fat. And so...
Who needed to diet, which was also cultural acceptance.
Exactly, and it's all a story of control. And when you think that you control this, you think you control every aspect of your life, but you don't. And then food becomes the enemy, in fact. And so of course I had no idea that I was really suffering from this, and nobody really saw it, because that's the thing also with what we call in French trouble du comportement alimentaire, TCA. It happens to people of all ages. It happens to people of both sexes. It can start out in your teenage years, and it can last for years. It can start out later. The pandemic has made eating disorders blow up all over the world, which I did not know. I found this out later. It's become a real issue in very many different countries. I don't know if it's big here,
Of course.
in the Netherlands, but in France it is, in England it is, in Spain it is. So the surprising thing now for me is that I thought that this was something very personal, that I could learn to talk about, but I didn't believe for 1 minute that it would interest anyone. But then as I started the promotion, and I was getting more and more feedback from readers and meeting readers like today in different cities in France, every time I would meet people with eating disorders who either were in tears because they'd never talked about it, and it was so helpful for them to be in front of somebody who A, could talk about it, and who B, got out of it.
Yeah. How did you get out of it?
It was very long. It was
a
very
process.
it was very difficult.
Yes.
I'd say that for a long time it was like being obsessed with food and always thinking that I'd had to be on this diet. The throwing up, vomiting had stopped, thank God, because that was very violent. Actually, maybe you've heard of the series The Crown, and the fact that Princess Diana suffered from this bulimia for very many years.
Yeah.
And that made people more aware of what it was. The only way to tackle this is to talk about it, is to seek help. Today, there are so many different ways of getting help on social media, associations, talking to people, hypnosis. But talking about it is the first step. And I wasn't capable of doing this for such a long time. Candice is helped. We're not going to say how and why, but she is helped and she will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So now my message to people, and it's very touching to see all these people come to see me. Either they come because they're suffering, or they know somebody who is suffering, or they have a daughter or a niece or a grandchild. And I say the first thing is to really just try to put the words on what this is, because if you don't do that, it's going to eat you up.
So talk about it, but the next step was to write about it.
Well, luckily for me, I started talking about it, I'd say probably when I was 40, but I hadn't really talked about it the way I talked. I mean, for some people, some of the scenes in the book are very hard to read.
Yes, I can imagine. It's very much in your face.
Because it's a total description of what this means to have an eating disorder. And I think many people don't understand what it is until they read it. So I think I realized that I had suffered. I thought I was over it when I was 40. And when I did seek help, quite recently actually, although I haven't suffered from this for a long time, but I realized the mark it left on me, in fact. You know, like something leaves a stain. And it's only really now that I've freed myself from it completely.
By writing about it.
No,
And
first by seeing a psychiatre who really helped me. Because so many, everybody's story is personal, everybody's eating disorder is different, but you need to seek professional help. Hypnosis helped. And I hadn't planned to write about this at all.
No.
As you know.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like I'm going to sit down and write about something that I've never... So it was also very interesting for me to learn how to talk about it, because it's not easy to say I've had an eating disorder, but you're right, it has helped. Although when I did the audiobook, because I tape all my books, and actually Candice is a sound engineer and she tapes audiobooks, so it's kind of a homage to my team. Those scenes were very, very difficult to read.
Yeah.
I had to sort of stop and
and
all these people who I work with, they had no idea why I was, why it was so difficult, and I think they slowly understood why it was so difficult. But now I feel better, of course, talking about it, but I'm still shocked by the amount of people who suffer from this, and people who are older than me who suffer from this. I had no idea that this was so present in people's lives and that we're still struggling with this. It's a shock for me to realize this. So I'm hoping that somehow this book might help.
Yeah.
I hope it will. I really do.
Because will you tell us that you have talked about it with many people since on your book tours?
Yes.
So that says something.
And the emails I've been getting, and the letters, and that's something that's, both, it gives me pleasure, but it also makes me a bit sad, because there is pain there. And people sometimes say to me, you're the first person I've talked about this. I mean, can you imagine? They queue up in the bookstores, and they whisper, and they say, you're the first person that I've ever told that I have this. And I say, please get help.
Yeah.
Just please, go online. There's so many different solutions, just do it, please. And I can't check up on them, and I don't know their names, but I hope they do it.
No.
I hope they do it.
I hope so too.
Yeah, me too.
Well, let's try to go on a lighter note.
Oh yes, we must.
To wrap this up. Well, I was thinking this is also about, eating disorders and how to overcome them in a way, because Candice does that. But it's also about literature and about the joy of reading.
Yes.
Very much.
Absolutely. and we're in a bookstore, so I think everybody who's here today knows about the power of literature and how it can be a healing process. Candice is somebody who, in the beginning of the book, she's not a reader at all. She's never been interested in reading. She comes from a family who don't read, and she's more into music. And Dominique is a very intellectual person who is completely set alight by her passion for Zola, a bit like me. And Dominique has a beautiful voice. And that's how the sound engineer is all of a sudden going to understand that this woman that she has helped after this terrible accident, who's no longer has a job and who has to earn her living, she's going to ask Dominique to read Zola's most famous works. And that was interesting also to show. I don't know if audiobooks are big here or if they're starting to become.
So. Yeah, I think so.
So Dominique is a born reader
Of Zola.
of Zola, and the way she reads Zola, that's how Candice is gonna fall into Zola's trap. Because once you start listening, reading, that's how she slowly, very slowly becomes a reader, but not immediately, otherwise it would be, too easy. It's only much later that she becomes a reader and she realizes how important literature is in her life.
It helps
Yes.
her very much.
And she reads other books from Zola. She suddenly becomes a reader. She suddenly goes to bookstores and buys books. And that was very important for me because, reading saves lives. We all know that. What would we do without books?
Tell me, why is reading so important?
Well, because it takes you into another world. And it's a way of also making your brain work. I mean, we all love looking at Netflix and our Instagram page, but our brains don't work in that way. And I think reading is both a challenge and an opportunity to discover the way somebody else thinks or the way somebody else wants you to think. And I've been an avid reader since I knew how to read. Reading is a very important activity for me. I think that if I couldn't read, I'd be very, 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 very upset. People read less nowadays, alas, I think.
Yes.
I don't know why. But I think that when you love to read, it stays with you all your life. I really do.
I was also thinking, because of what happens in the book, that empathy is also a big part of reading, and also for Candice. And I was thinking about the scene in the beginning of the book with the accident and everybody just filming and not noticing, and that.
You're right.
Well, and that.
I think that but in the beginning, don't forget, she's not yet a reader, but
No.
she's somebody who's interested in other people, and
there we are.
exactly. And
Yeah.
she's not going to sit there and film the accident
No.
like some people did. She's going to help.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned before, it isn't a biography of Zola's, but you do write biography, don't you? And we have this other book just translated into Dutch.
Well, that's not really a biography. It's a letter that I wrote to Tatiana de Rosnay, who's my favorite painter. When I was a teenager, I had 4 people in my life that I deeply admired. One of them is a mystery, which I'm not going to tell you because I'm writing about this person now, and if I tell you now, you're all going to go, oh, and my publisher doesn't know yet, so yes, exactly. So there's that person. Then
Your
there...
teenage years were very fruitful, weren't they?
Then there was
Yes.
Émile Zola, Daphne du Maurier, and Tamara de Lempicka, who is this Polish painter that fascinated me from my very young years, and her life is extraordinary. And so this is a letter that I wrote to her, telling her life, but not like a biography. It's really my letter to her. She was a very particular woman. I don't think she was very sympathique. She was very into herself. She would have been the queen of Instagram today. But she was an amazing painter. She was the painter of Les Années Folles in Paris, in Montparnasse. Her love life is unbelievable. She loved men, she loved women, she had an incredible confidence in herself, contrarily to Candice and me.
We could all use that.
Oh yeah, she was sure of herself ever since the beginning, and her life is extraordinary. And so I wrote this letter. Interestingly enough, in the original version of this book, it was a photographic project that I wrote with my daughter, who's a photographer, and she reimagined Tamara Lampika's world of the 1920s and found a model who looked like her paintings, and it was very interesting to work with my daughter.
Yes, of course.
But this is just the text of this letter that I write to Tamara. But it's not a fan letter, because that would be, I think, a little bit too tepid. It's more me sort of like saying, sometimes I criticize her and say, you know, come on, Tamara, the way you treat other people, the way you treated your husband, the way you treated your daughter, the way you lie about your age, the way you're so vain. But she was a fascinating creature, and I hope one day they make a biopic of her life, because it would be, I think, something very, very special.
But do I understand you correctly? Are you working on a biography now?
No,
again?
absolutely not.
Not non-fiction.
No. I have finally found my way into this extraordinary person's life, who was my fourth passion. I have, you know, it's, if I tell you the name, you're all going to go, ah. So I have finally found a personal path into this person's life. It took me a long time, but I found it.
Okay. So you're very happy you want to go back home and write.
Yeah, but I can't, because I'm on a book tour.
I'm sorry.
And I have another nine events.
Okay.
Until January 15th.
Okay. So you have to wait until then.
Exactly. But I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I wonder, anybody in the audience who would like to ask something to Tatiana?
Yes, please. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is René. I live here in Holland, and I was reading on the internet that has nothing to do with your books, but you were a descendant of Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
That's right. Do you know
That was
who
very
he is?
interesting.
Who he was?
You see, I'm an autograph collector, and I've got an autograph letter signed by him and a signed check. And I wonder, are you a direct descendant from him, or?
Yes, I'm a direct descendant.
Really?
Yes, I'll explain who he is. Okay, so Isambard Kingdom Brunel was my great-great-great-great-grandfather on the British side.
Four
and
times.
He was a very famous engineer. In Victorian, he created all the railway system in England and all the big ships. And he was as famous in England as, I'd say, Eiffel. Gustave Eiffel is famous in France, but nobody has heard of him out of England, so I'm very touched that you would know who
but
he
was.
was.
But he was chosen in the top 10 as the greatest Briton of all
Exactly.
times.
Exactly. But
Just after Churchill.
But the younger generation have no idea who he is.
No.
They have no idea. But you know something? One day, perhaps not now, but he had an extraordinary life. And he also died in a very precocious way. He also dug the tunnel under the River Thames. He had an extraordinary life, and he was like me, half French, half English.
I know.
Right.
Because his father was Mark, and he was famous as well.
Exactly. You know nearly as much as me.
So you have to write a book about
I will.
Are you interested to write a book?
I will. I'm just waiting a bit. I'll tell you why. My English family are very possessive about him, and they sort of have all the paperwork, and they think that they are, you know, the
owner
yes.
of the story.
So I'm just waiting a bit.
Some people die.
I'm probably going to write about, if I write about him one day, I will write about his life in Paris when he came to work for Breguet, the clock owner. He was a brilliant engineer.
He was.
Actually, one of my cousins is called Isambard because of
really?
him. Yes.
That's very interesting.
And,
Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for mentioning it. It's the first time anybody.
Yes.
So I'll explain to you how I descend from him, So my mother's mother
Yeah.
was called Cynthia Noble,
Yes.
and so Isambard Kingdom Brunel was her great-grandfather.
Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she grew up in adoration. She never knew him, of course, but ever since I was small, she would always show us the photos and the story, and you have this wonderful great-great-great-great-grandfather, you have to know who he is. So I'm touched that you...
He built the first ocean steamer.
He did. Absolutely.
Ever. That's remarkable.
And his physique was quite remarkable. You know that photo of him standing in front of with his top hat.
I know. Yes.
You know, with his cigar. He was quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
So I think that might make a good book in my later years.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Bedankt.
Anybody else?
Question.
Yes.
Okay.
Were you shocked that you wrote about this personal stuff in your book? That
What-
you had to write it? Were you shocked about it?
I don't think shocked is the right word, because it's not like it sort of like appeared suddenly. I just realized little by little that I had started to write about it. And then as it doesn't, you'll see it's not like the heart of the book, but it comes up in different passages of the book. And I think I was perhaps surprised when I came to the end of it. And that's when I said to myself, what am I going to do now? Because I realized that I had to get this book published. I wasn't going to sit in my computer for the rest of my life. And then I had to ask myself the question, okay, do I say it's me, or do I say it's somebody I know?
It's
And
more
that-
fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. I had to sort of work on that. So I don't think shocked is the right word. I'd say perhaps more surprised, but you know something, as I was saying earlier on, writing is full of surprises, and if it's not, then get another job. I think you have to surprise yourself, and you have to surprise your own readers. So I think my readers understand that this is a very personal book. When they read it, they understand immediately. They know.
And why did you decide that you wanted to tell the world that it was a personal experience and not your fantasy?
Because I think it was impossible to lie. I think that most of the people who read this book understand immediately that it's personal, even though Candice is not my age, and her life is not mine at all. But I think those details, and I'm sure probably you thought, where is all this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very
detailed.
detailed,
Yes,
personal.
and,
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
You had no choice really.
No.
In the back.
For me, the heart of the book was the question of trust. Because,
Yes, trust and distrust.
Yeah, and that was very nice in the book. All the time it thought, would I trust her now? Is she trustable? Yes,
Yeah.
no.
It's a suspense
Yeah,
element,
suspense.
yeah.
It's difficult for me to answer that question completely because we give away too many things,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
people here have not.
No spoilers,
Yeah,
no
no,
spoilers.
But-
that's why.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
and I think it's only at the end of the book that you really understand how the question of trust is essential, obviously, and also the fact that Candice doesn't understand all these things immediately herself. It takes a while to process. That's why the book is about a path, and that path is not an easy path. It twists and turns. It's not obvious. Nothing is obvious in the book, really. You never know which foot to stand on, really, until the end, until the very end. But thank you for your question.
That makes it a good read.
I hope.
Yes. Anybody else who wants to know something? I was also thinking about, well, another element in the novel, obviously, is Paris. It's very much a Parisian novel. Paris is like a character in the novel, with a very detailed descriptions of where they go to, where they live, the apartments, where they eat. Was that something you wanted, you were thinking up in your lockdown situation?
I think that in all my books, Paris is very present. In these two books here,
Mm-hmm.
Paris is there. In the family reunion in the house I loved, I'm a Parisian. I love to complain about my city, but I love it as well. I love to hate it. I love to also say what's wrong with it, but I love it.
Yeah.
Really deeply.
You read that too. And you wrote it in French.
This one I wrote in French.
Yes.
That one too.
Mm-hmm.
It's never easy explaining how and why some books come in English and some books come in French. I don't really understand myself.
I'll try.
That's the part of being bilingual. But Flowers of Darkness I wrote in both languages at the same time. I don't know how I did that, but I did. So maybe this new book about this mysterious person, as it takes part in America,
Okay.
that's the only thing I'm giving away. I think I have to write it in both languages.
Again.
Yes.
Why?
Because it was a fascinating experience and I don't like to be translated. I mean, I don't mind being translated into Dutch because I can't read it,
No.
obviously. I can't judge my Spanish translators or
No.
my Greek translators or my Russian translators,
You
but I
have to
can't
trust them.
But I can judge my French or English translators, and I'm a nightmare for them.
Yes, I can imagine.
They're
Yeah.
terrified of me.
Yeah.
So, and as I'm never really happy with what they do, because I have two languages, and I go from one to the other, and it's very difficult for me to choose the language I write in. When I start a book in French, the English part is always saying, hey, what about me? Et quand je commence un livre en français, voilà, c'est très compliqué. So, as I really thought that Flowers of Darkness, it was exhausting.
Yeah.
But it was a fascinating experience. So I think I might try it again. But it might kill me.
Okay, farewell.
How to fry your brain, right, in two languages.
But morgen zal het beter gaan. What needed to be in French, obviously.
Yes, I think it needed to be in French because of Zola.
Okay, yeah.
And I think he influenced my writing. I could never compare my writing to Zola. Never. He's like a god to me. But I think he influenced me. And I could not have written this book in English.
Well,
So voilà.
I'll trust you on that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you were telling about the bilingual stuff of your writing, but you were also telling that you planned to write this book. You totally planned the whole book, but it became sort of intuitive writing. Is your next book going to be more
Intuitive.
Yeah, thank you. Or are you going to plan it again?
I have to plan it because I'm talking about somebody who existed. So I have to stick to some dates and to some locations. But as this is not an autobiography, and I have a very personal entry into this story, so I'm totally free to tell that story. And I have to be very original on this one because there's been so much written about this person. So I have to really, and it's not about this person actually. This person is just in the story. My heroine is a young woman, but she's going to meet this person in a very strange way. That's all I'm saying.
I'm saying go back home, skip the book tour. Just
Tell
write
them I
the
love
book.
each other. Hey, we won't cut off.
You're just teasing us.
It's being filmed.
Diana?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I'm a translator, French Dutch,
Okay.
and you said you sometimes write both
At the same time.
languages simultaneously. How do you manage to keep the same register? Because in a different language it can sometimes sound so very different.
You know, I have absolutely no idea. All I can tell you is that technically I wrote this book in the following way. I would have one page in English, one page in French, and I would go from one to the other. I still don't know how I did it. All I can say is that when at the end of the day I would read my chapter in English, and then I don't even know which came first really, because it's so sort of like intertwined. But the final result in either English or in French, it had to be exactly what I wanted. It had to correspond exactly to my thoughts in both languages. So there were some words that were really tricky. Sometimes I say to myself, what on earth am I doing? My husband would come into my office and he'd say, you have smoke coming out of your ears. So I didn't really worry about the register. I would worry more about, it's a bit like, imagine you have this radio and you're listening to a channel that's in French. And then you want to have exactly the same meaning of what the person is saying in English. So you have to turn that little button around, okay? And find the same frequency. And then I did not want to betray my own work or to take any liberties with it. I didn't want to say, oh, I don't know how to translate that, so I'm gonna keep it out. I really stuck to it. And sometimes I came up with the most amazing discoveries. Like I realized if I was in the other language, for example, and I had already written something in English or in French, I suddenly found a better way of saying in English what I had just translated into French. And then sometimes when I was stuck in a dialogue or in a scene and I felt it was going stale, I would just change the language and poof, it would go off again with a new energy. That was really strange. I've met some bilingual authors before, but they have different methods. They like to write their book in, like, say, one language. Okay, so I don't know if it's French or English, but let's say French. They'll write it in French, and then they'll translate it. But I don't find that interesting. I like the immediacy, but it's also
the connection.
Exactly, but it's really, sometimes I think of it with pleasure and sometimes I think of it with pain. Because I know I have to go back down that road again.
Yeah, because at the moment you write it, it must also come with a certain feeling or a sentiment. Or
Yeah.
So,
And
if you finish the whole book first in one language, then you forget about that.
exactly,
Yeah.
and that's why
Yeah.
I think I want to go back to this experiment again. And I remember my publishers, when I gave them the two books at the same time, they were like, wait a minute, this is the same book in both languages. I said, yes, you can check. And
I wonder, which version do we have in Dutch? Is it translated from from English or from French? French.
well, I don't think it makes that much difference because I'm the author of both,
I was just wondering.
you know?
Yeah.
It would be easier to find a translator from English than from French.
For
They
here,
chose French.
Sorry,
They chose French. No,
it was a better translator.
probably. Okay. Nobody else.
the last question of the evening.
Yes.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Dun,
No
dun, dun.
pressure. No pressure. Okay. Well then, I'll say thank you again.
Well, thank you again. Really.
And I hope you all read the book and have it signed by Tatiana.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Merci beaucoup.